Alright, so I already went ahead and added the hatches. So I have a driver's hatch, the rider's hatch, and a commander's hatch. So I just added these as well, but they open in two different stages. So first the hatch opens up and then the seat raises, so I can show you that now. Yes, tank. And also when closing, it lowers the seat, then closes the hatch. Another thing, I got an interior that's really basic, and I don't know what the inside of this thing is supposed to look like. Also, it's not a full interior either, so if I just go in between, it's just kind of like two crew compartments and very empty engine bay. But one thing I could definitely show you is how the hatches work. So you can already kind of see I have a hologram, but all of this is Holo-Parent, by the way. So I have a hologram for my hinge, and that just rotates through usually 90 degrees. This one rotates through 95 degrees and a little bit because it's on a little bit of a slope, but the rest of these are flat. So there's the hinge holo, and then there's a sliding holo. Actually, I didn't make my gates invisible yet. But... So that E2, it's actually a combination of E2s, now that I think of it. So I went ahead and jerry-rigged my auxiliary functions E2 to basically take inputs from the driver, commander, and rider. So pod int is just the driver because I actually have a pod controller for him, commander chair, rider chair. And actually you don't need a pod controller to log the key presses from those guys because you can just get the driver. So driver equals pod int driver, commander, commander chair driver. As long as they go to the chairs, so when they hit a button, and it's a toggle button as well, it toggles whether or not they should be open hatch or closed hatch. So that E2 goes to this new E2 which I made, which is kind of cryptic, but it's that Holo-Parent stuff. So for the raising and lowering holo, the hologram is basically on top of the gate, as you can actually see. But I'm not using a gate, I'm actually using the prop to mesh controller, and mine's invisible, but it's over here, in case of the rider. Let me actually put my 3 points over there. But yeah, I have this mounted off center, and that's still parented to the hologram. So why is that important? So I have some coordinates. So there's the home positions for the gates themselves. So I have chair gates and then hatch gates, and basically it just repeats in a stack, as you can see right here. Rider, commander, driver. And I also have some initial angles, or like home angles for the prop to mesh controllers, because they're at a bit of an offset angle. So for my Holo-Parent stuff, what I like to have here, and this is very long, but even in my piston arm E2 over here, it's a little bit more simple because it's going through an array. But basically what all this does is, well, it deparents the gate first, freezes it, but basically it's a set pose and set angle, and this makes the Holo-Parent stuff less savage. Now, if the thing you have is a gate, the props that are parented to the gate can still get disconnected. So Holo-Parenting is still savage, but having a little set pose and set ang on it, and also parenting after a little delay, I have it on 45 milliseconds. So after 45 milliseconds, if you set parent to 1, then it'll parent the whatever you wired the gate inputs to. So basically that's just the part that parents the gate or whatever you wire as the gate to the hologram. as far as actually moving it, again, it's very similar for the 3 hatches. So driver, commander, rider. So basically, you have a state which it approaches the target and eventually does get there, but I'm using a clamp to limit how fast it's able to do that with animation rate. So it goes from 0 to 1, so I'm using a decimal value. And based on, here I called it driver state or commander state, whatever state. Based on that value, it'll, first it goes from, well, for the hand. So I wanted the hatch to open first, so basically from 0 to 0.5 is where that works. So I have a little bit of math to limit it, and the same is for the chair gates. So the chair gates go from 0.5 to 1, so I have some more math to limit that as well. But basically this is how far the driver's chair moves up and down, commanders, and the riders, and also I have some angles here. So basically based on whatever the state is, it'll basically move the chair gate up and down, and the hatch gate, it'll pivot around by basically the vector and the angle here. And they all have their own controls for opening their hatch, which I'm probably not going to set to space for the driver because space is going to be the brakes, but yeah, there's something else I'm pretty happy with. So next up, I have to make some controls for the driver, which is also the operator, to control the excavator arm and also the bulldozer blade. So that's gonna be next. Okay, so now the hydraulics are able to be controlled by the driver rather than a bunch of levers that I have to spawn with a bunch of different values now. So I did modify AE2, and unlike the hatches, it's not a combination of E2s, but that crane arm E2, which I will probably rename to something else because it's not a crane. That I renamed that and made it more specific to this vehicle, but you can have a look in here. Added a wire link for the pod controller, and I have some keybinds here. But yeah, so the only keybinds I have are basically WASD and the arrow keys. So and also F toggles the control mode because I want it to be, well, basically just WASD and the arrow keys. And we have driving and then excavating. So I'm gonna have to add something in the driving chip that'll stop WASD from being used, but you can see where I'm changing my hydraulic links in the 2 states. So the hydraulic controllers just got wired up to basically some variables here with the bulldozer and also the excavator arm. So, the controls for this will probably be changed a little bit, but I've been tinkering with it a little bit. So what am I in? Okay, so in driving, WASD isn't used, but the arrow keys are for the dozer bucket. The dozer blade, I guess. So it moves up and down, and it can pivot as well. So probably one of the more overcomplicated bulldozer blades in GMod, but well, that makes it fun. And if I hit F again, I get little hints as well that tell me whether or not I'm excavating or driving. But there's S and W that just controls the initial elevation, I guess. Not sure what the technical term for this is, but raises and lowers it. A and D, move it left and right. Up arrow key, the second hydraulic length, or the second arm's hydraulic length. And left arrow key, right arrow key controls the bucket. So perhaps a bit slow right now, but I can tune this later. Also in the, I guess, travel position, there's not really a whole lot to keep this in place. It's just the hydraulics. Let me see if I can line it up. Right about there. So yeah, that's the controls for the hydraulics. Just some kind of primitive keybinds, I guess. I also made a damaged model, and if you're asking why, I guess just because I felt like it. Yep, so I basically got the mesh and just put plates around it and viz clipped it. No resizer, because resizer doesn't change the hitbox of a prop. So the only thing I can point out right now is that I'm using thicker props for the front of the tank because you get slightly more health. I guess you could use the very thick blocks, but those are really heavy. So thicker props for the front of the tank, thinner props for the side and, well, sort of weaker areas of the tank, and really thin props for the roof. Except for the base plate. The base plate is... I need it to be about 4.5 tons to stop the hydraulics from spazzing out on me. So those are... Here the base plate's just kind of heavy. If you're ever wondering how I armor any of my tanks, you came to the wrong person, because I barely fight in ACF at all, really. But the way I armor my tanks lately is basically trying to build the armor around like a gun, basically. So am I being shot by a 120 or am I going to be shot by a 75? And basically just that for the front and side. If I'm being shot up the rear or through the roof, well, I have bigger problems, quite frankly. So another thing I'll mention is it's kind of tempting to... Well, actually, let me back up. So this is my front armor. So I want to say about 7 tons per side, so 14 tons, and then 16. So kind of heavy, but the side armor can be surprisingly heavy. So here is all the side pieces, if I can get it. About 4 tons, and you can see it's not that thick. Oh, actually, even more than 4 tons, because there's a superstructure on top, and so 4 tons over here, like, let's just say 8 tons, and then if you consider the other side, more like 16 tons, and it's not particularly thick. It's 80 millimeters. And the reason it's so heavy is because, well, let's look at the area of the side of the tank and then look at the area of the front of the tank, and you can kind of see why. But it can be kind of tempting to, or it is tempting to cut armor over the side, because side of the tank. But for the side of the tank, again, it's similar to the front of the tank. I'll just try and see what gun, or, you know, what am I going to be shot at from the side? Or not what at, but what can I stop from the side? And for the side armor, flat on, not a whole lot, because 80 millimeters. Technically 82 and something if you look at that from the side. But for my side armor, I usually check at a angle. So, for example, Don't mind the second number, though I'll talk about that later, but let's just say 113 millimeters of armor. That'll stop like a 37 millimeter shell, maybe a 50 millimeter shell at longer ranges. AP, by the way. If it's something else, well, no. And if I increase the angle to, say, about, what's 30 degrees? Right there. So 160. Again, ignore the second number, that's something else. So that would stop like a 75 millimeter shell. A 75 millimeter shell. And even at a sharper angle. 100 millimeter shell. AP shell. And near the tracks it's a bit weaker, it's 60, but even then you can kind of see what kind of angles you can stop what kind of gun. So not quite a 75, but then again you have the wheels, so at the expense of not being able to move anymore, yeah, that'll stop a 75 millimeter shell, I guess. And I didn't really talk about the front of the tank. Again, ignore the second number, that's for something else. Barely well, that'll stop a 100 millimeter shell, but even with that much health, the second shell will just go right through. So it'll take quite a few 75 millimeter shells, I guess. AP, by the way, because AP does a lot of damage to the plate. So the idea is you shoot it once with a 100 millimeter gun, and then it'll be sufficiently damaged that the next shot will go right through. Now, in theory, you could do something where you, at like a glancing angle, you can check the roof armor, but I just set it to 35 for now. Around the crew compartment, that is. Yeah, these don't really have to be that thick. If you're getting shot over here, probably have a... Well, I mean, yeah, it's a weak point. But there's also a big crane that goes here, so maybe that helps? Question mark. This stuff... This is, so basically, primarily over the engine. So, from an aircraft, you're gonna lose your engine. Or I'm gonna lose my engine if I get shot over here. And again, I'm probably not going into combat with this thing, but hypothetically speaking. And then you have the rear of the tank, which, yeah, I mean, there's realistically not gonna be any armor over here, but I have a little bit, I guess. Oh, yeah. So, comparatively speaking, more armor over, like, for example, your turret, and less over the engine. Even though things can go wrong if you get shot in the engine. Or, well, I mean, you're not able to move if you get shot in the engine, and possibly your fuel explodes and all that kind of stuff. But maybe you're still alive. I don't know. So, yeah, about those other stupid numbers in the armor viewer that I told you to ignore. So, my outer shell is basically meant for, or built with AP in mind. So, I said, it technically has enough armor to stop a 100 millimeter gun, but it's AP, and AP and ACF does a lot of damage to something it can penetrate and just about penetrate, so... And even to something it can't really penetrate at all, if you shoot it enough, it'll damage it a lot. So outer shell is meant for AP, and in a few places, I don't really do this very often, but I have a second armor layer. Now the extent of the second armor layer is just plate right here, plate right here, plate right here, and plate right here. So that's my heat layer. That is it. So, oh yeah, and the reason I said that this doesn't really, or I should say it now, this doesn't work at all against AP, because look at the health on this plate, 177, 111 for that inner plate. 20. And also over the side, 29. So, basically, if an AP shell does something nasty to this plate is probably going to be gone. So technically you can like take a 140mm shell initially, but not after that. But this is meant primarily for heat, because heat in ACF doesn't do a whole lot of damage even if it penetrates something. So the idea is heat is going to have enough penetration to get through the outer layer of armor. But because it doesn't do a whole lot of damage, the inner plate doesn't have to be as healthy. So you can just drag left onto the utility slider and put the armor relatively high, still high enough to stop the heat shell combined with the thickness of the outer layer. And you have a heat layer. So in this case, I don't have ACF missiles installed right now, so I tested it against some short cannons. So at around about 350mm of penetration from a 100mm short, it was able to take a few of those. 120 short cannon with, I want to say 450, not so much. So, yeah. Not particularly amazing shape charge protection, I guess. And over the side, let me actually just kind of move this thing. Oops. This goes through the entire tank, so no, not 577, more like 250, just the first two there. So even less heat protection over the side. So shot it at the side with a 75mm short cannon with, I believe, I forget how much penetration it had, but I want to say like 230. So it can take a few of them. So ideally, I believe, you know, things like the, I'm not sure how much penetration the tow missile gets off the top of my head in ACF, but heat penetration should be the same as on those missiles. So kind of nice on the front. It's still not a whole lot because there's heat shells that can penetrate way more than that. I know people like to run around with the 155 shooting heat, and that gets almost like 600mm of penetration. So yeah, it's gonna go in one side and out the other. But I thought it was kind of cool to put an armor layer on this, because this is built on a Leopard 2, and Leopard 2 has some sort of composite on it. I'm not sure about the actual Kodiak in particular. It looks like they just kind of slapped a steel casemate on it, but I don't know. And I really don't put armor layers on all my tanks, especially if they don't have any armor to begin with. But another thing is, this is just the damage model. So if I actually get the total mass, this is on ACF2 by the way, but 60 tons just for the damage model, and I know for the physical model, so the base plate isn't actually connected to it. I know the gate looks like it's attached, but it's not. The physical model was something like 7 tons so far, and that's not including the tracks and the engine. So, like 70 tons, which is well past 60 tons. It doesn't help that it's still quite a large vehicle, as you can see, with a casemate even. So, quite heavy and not a whole lot of armor for something so heavy. And ideally you would build a lot closer around your components. So spawn the components first, then build the tank around that for the most amount of your armor. But yeah, this thing is like the size of a house. Not as big as a mouse though. I may or may not know that from experience. So yeah, the next thing I need to do is actually move the damage model over, and another thing is I'm actually going to make this entire thing invisible. So basically 0 alpha, so that it shouldn't affect anyone's frame rate, because that's the whole advantage of Proximish. What else? Oh yeah. I have hatches. I can parent those to my little animated gates and get those to actually move or open and close, which is kind of cool. The last thing I really need to do is make it drive. So that should be fun. I can actually drive around in my stupid engineering tank.